An 18-year-old student sat handcuffed in front of a crowded departure lounge, head bowed in humiliation. A first-class ticket lay on the floor, disregarded by a sneering gate agent, confident in her petty power trip. But as the cold metal clicked shut on Margot Reynolds's wrists, nobody knew who was sitting in the cockpit of the massive jet just outside the window. They saw a quiet girl in a hoodie. They didn't see the daughter of the man who literally owned the skies they were about to fly in. When the captain's voice finally crackled over the intercom, the silence in the terminal was deafening. The karma wasn't just coming, it was already cruising at 30,000 feet. The fluorescent lights of Terminal 4 at JFK International Airport hummed with the manic energy of holiday travel. Outside, heavy snow flurries danced against the floor-to-ceiling glass, threatening delays that made every passenger's shoulders tense. But inside the boarding area for Flight 882 to London, the tension had nothing to do with the weather. Margot Reynolds sat near the window, her noise-cancelling headphones doing their best to drown out the chaos. She adjusted her thick-rimmed glasses and pulled the oversized sleeves of her university hoodie over her hands. At 18, Margot had the look of someone trying to disappear. No designer luggage, no flashy jewelry, just a battered backpack and a quiet, studious demeanor. She was exhausted from finals week at Columbia and just wanted to get home for the break. Zone 1, first-class passengers only. The sharp voice cut through the stagnant air like a knife. Standing at the podium was Beatrice Halloway, a gate agent who wore her uniform like armor and her authority like a weapon. Her name tag was polished to a blinding shine, but her expression was scuffed with permanent disdain. Beatrice had been working the gate for 20 years, and in her mind, she was the final arbiter of who belonged on her plane and who didn't. She prided herself on keeping the riffraff out of the front cabin. Margot stood up, sliding her phone into her pocket. She held her boarding pass, a digital QR code on her screen, and joined the short line of suits, cashmere coats, and platinum frequent flyers. Beatrice scanned the line, her eyes narrowing instantly as they landed on Margot. She saw the fraying hem of the hoodie, the scuffed sneakers, and the skin color that, in Beatrice's prejudiced calculus, didn't add up to Zone 1. She stepped out from behind the podium, bypassing a businessman in a grey suit to physically block Margot's path. "Excuse me," Beatrice snapped, her hand raised in a stop motion. "This is for first class. Economy boarding is in Zone 4. Wait until we call it. You need to wait your turn over there." She pointed vaguely toward a crowded corner where frustrated families were camping on the floor. Margot paused, pulling one side of her headphones back. She kept her voice polite. "I know. I'm in first class, seat 1A. Beatrice let out a short, incredulous laugh that sounded more like a bark. She looked around at the other passengers, inviting them to share in the joke. "Seat 1A? Honey, seat 1A is reserved for VIPs, diplomats, and full-fare executive travelers. Let's see your ticket." Margot sighed, sensing the familiar weight of scrutiny she had dealt with her entire life. She held out her phone. Beatrice snatched the device from her hand, her long, manicured nails clicking aggressively against the screen. She stared at the digital pass, her brow furrowing. It clearly read, "First class. Seat 1A. Reynolds." "This looks manipulated," Beatrice declared loudly, ensuring the restless crowd behind them could hear. "We've had a lot of students trying to hack the app lately. You think you can just Photoshop your way into the front of the plane because you don't want to sit in the back?" "I didn't hack anything," Margot said, her voice steady but tightening. "My father booked the ticket. Please just scan it. The system will verify it." "I'm not scanning a fake ticket," Beatrice hissed. She thrust the phone back at Margot so hard it nearly fell to the floor. "Step aside. You're holding up legitimate passengers, people who actually paid." I am a legitimate passenger, Margot insisted, stepping forward. Scan it. If it doesn't work, then you can kick me out. But you haven't even tried. Don't you take that tone with me? Beatrice countered, her face flushing red. She signaled to a security officer standing near the walkway, a man named Officer Miller, who looked bored and eager for a distraction. Officer, we have a disruptive passenger refusing to follow boarding procedures. Miller lumbered over, his hand resting on his belt. What's the problem here, Beatrice? She's trying to board with a fraudulent ticket and is becoming aggressive, Beatrice lied smoothly. I asked her to step aside, and she refused. I want her removed from the gate area immediately. Aggressive? Margot repeated, looking around at the shocked faces of the other passengers. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't touched anyone. I just want to board the plane. That's enough, Miller grunted. He didn't ask for Margot's side of the story. He saw a frazzled veteran agent and a young black student in a hoodie. He made his assumption. Miss, you need to come with me. You're causing a scene. I'm not going anywhere until you scan my ticket, Margot said, frustration finally cracking her calm facade. She held the phone toward the scanner on the podium, desperate to prove her truth. Beatrice reacted with shocking speed. She slapped Margot's hand away. I told you to step back. The phone skittered across the carpet, sliding under a row of seats. A collective gasp went through the line. That is assault on an airline employee, Beatrice screeched, playing to the gallery. Officer, arrest her. She lunged at me. You all saw it. It was a lie so bold it took a moment to register. But Miller, trained to react rather than investigate, grabbed Margot's arm and twisted it behind her back. All right, that's it. Turn around. What? No. Check the cameras, Margot cried out, as the cold metal of handcuffs clicked around her wrists. This is insane. You can't do this. I have a ticket. I just did, Miller said, tightening the cuffs until Margot winced. Beatrice smoothed her skirt, a smug smile playing on her lips. Let this be a lesson, she announced to the room. We do not tolerate fraud or violence on this airline. Zone 1, please continue boarding. Margot was shoved toward a row of plastic seats near the window, humiliated, tears stinging her eyes. She looked out at the massive Boeing 777 being prepped for departure. The cockpit window was high above, dark and reflective. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. They had taken her phone, but they hadn't taken her voice, and they certainly didn't realize that the pilot conducting the pre-flight check in that very plane was Captain David Reynolds, a man who had never been late for a flight, and certainly never late for his daughter. You're making a huge mistake, Margot whispered to Miller as he pushed her into the seat. My dad is going to be wondering where I am. Yeah. Tell it to the judge, Miller muttered, turning his back to her. Beatrice walked over one last time, towering over the seated, handcuffed girl. I'm going to make sure you're banned from this airline for life, she gloated, her voice low and venomous. Seat 1A. The arrogance. You people always think you can take what isn't yours. You should really check the passenger manifest, Margot said softly, staring Beatrice dead in the eyes. I don't need to check anything to know trash when I see it, Beatrice spat. She turned back to the podium, beaming at a wealthy-looking couple. So sorry for the delay, Mr. and Mrs. Vanderpump. Right this way. Margot closed her eyes. Just wait, she thought. Just wait until the captain notices seat 1A is empty. 30 feet above the tarmac, inside the cockpit of the massive Boeing 737-300ER, the atmosphere was a sanctuary of calculated precision. The flight deck smelled faintly of coffee and ozone, a scent that Captain David Reynolds had associated with home for over 30 years. David was a man who commanded respect without raising his voice. At 55, with salt and pepper hair cut in a military fade and a jawline that seemed carved from granite, He looked every bit the senior aviator. He wore the 4 gold stripes on his epaulets with a gravity that younger pilots envied. Today, he was running through the pre-flight checklist with his first officer, a sharp young pilot named Mark Stevens. "Hydraulics?" David asked, his eyes scanning the overhead panel. "Check. Pressurized and normal," Mark replied, flipping a switch. "Fuel load?" 140 tons. Plenty for the headwinds over the Atlantic," Mark confirmed, tapping the display on the flight management computer. David nodded, satisfied. He glanced at the Breitling Navitimer on his wrist. It was a vintage piece, a gift from his late wife, and he checked it superstitiously before every pushback. They were 45 minutes from departure. David allowed himself a small, private smile. This wasn't just another haul to London Heathrow. This was the Christmas flight. His daughter Margot was coming with him. It had been a grueling semester for her at Columbia University. She had been pulling all-nighters for weeks, studying for her pre-law exams. David had arranged for her to fly in seat 1A, the best seat in the house, so she could sleep for the entire 7-hour journey while he piloted them home. He reached into his flight bag and pulled out his iPhone. He had a text from Margot sent 20 minutes ago. "Through security. Heading to the gate. Can't wait to sleep for a week. Love you, Dad." "You expecting VIPs today, Captain?" Mark asked, noticing David's good mood. "The most important one," David chuckled, placing the phone back in the cradle. "My daughter is in 1A. It's her first time flying up front with me since she was a little girl. Don't bounce the landing, Mark, or I'll never hear the end of it." Mark laughed. "I'll grease it onto the runway, sir. Silk sheets." A soft chime signaled the intercom. It was Eleanor, the chief purser. Eleanor had been flying with David for a decade. She was the mother hen of the fleet, efficient, warm, and fiercely protective of her crew. "Captain," Elena's voice came through the headset. "Catering is loaded. We're just waiting on the final passenger count from the gate. Boarding is about 70% complete." "Thanks, Elena," David said. "Is 1A settled in?" I wanted to make sure she got the extra pillow. There was a pause on the line, a silence that stretched just a second too long. "Captain." "Seat 1A is empty," Elena said, sounding confused. "I thought maybe she was running late. The cabin is filling up, but the suite is empty." David frowned, his brow furrowing. Margot was never late. She was the kind of girl who arrived at the airport 3 hours early, just to read a book and drink coffee. If she texted 20 minutes ago that she was at the gate, she should have been the first person down the jet bridge. "That's odd," David murmured. "She's at the gate. Beatrice is working the podium today, right?" "Yes, it's Beatrice," Elena confirmed, her tone dropping slightly. The flight crews knew Beatrice Halloway well. She was notorious for her moods and her strict adherence to rules that often seemed made up on the spot. "You want me to call up there?" "No, I'll check the ACARS system for the passenger list," David said, a prickle of unease starting at the base of his neck. "Maybe she stopped to get food. Keep me posted, Elena." "Will do, Captain." David turned back to the center console, pulling up the digital manifest on the flight computer. He scrolled to the top of the list. 1A. Reynolds, M. Not boarded. "Everything okay, sir?" Mark asked, sensing the shift in the cockpit's energy. "I don't know," David said slowly. He looked out the side window. The snow was falling harder now, blurring the lights of the terminal building. He could see the jet bridge connected to the fuselage like an umbilical cord. "She's right there. Why isn't she on board?" He picked up his phone and dialed Margot's number, straight to voicemail. David's stomach tightened. Margot never turned her phone off when they were traveling together. It was their rule. In case of emergencies, they stayed connected until the cabin doors closed. "Mark, continue the checklist," David ordered, his voice losing its warmth and taking on the steeliness of command. "I need to make a call." He dialed the gate desk directly via the aircraft's internal comms system. It rang, and rang, and rang. "Gate is busy," David muttered. He hit the button for the purser again. "Elena, has Beatrice sent the final paperwork down yet?" "She's walking down the bridge right now, Captain," Elena replied. "She looks agitated." "Send her to the cockpit immediately when she gets here," David said. "I want to know where my passenger is." David unbuckled his harness. The feeling in his gut wasn't just worry anymore. It was a specific, cold dread that every parent knows. Something was wrong. The logic didn't hold up. Margot was responsible. She had the ticket. She was at the gate. If she wasn't on the plane, someone had stopped her. And if Beatrice Halloway was involved, David knew it wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding. The air inside the first-class cabin was hushed and exclusive, a stark contrast to the frenzy of the terminal. Passengers settled into wide leather suites, sipping pre-flight champagne. But the energy shifted the moment Beatrice Halloway stormed through the aircraft door. She carried the final manifest clipboard against her chest, her face flushed with the adrenaline of her confrontation. She looked victorious. To her, removing a problematic passenger was a trophy, proof that she was the guardian of the airline's standards. Elena was standing in the galley, organizing welcome drinks. She looked up as Beatrice entered. "Beatrice, we're almost ready to push," Elena said, checking her watch. "Where's the rest of Zone 1? And we're still missing 1A. Beatrice let out a huff of air, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Don't worry about 1A. I handled it." "Handled it?" Elena asked, pausing with a crystal glass in her hand. "What does that mean? Did she miss the flight?" "Hardly," Beatrice scoffed, loud enough for the passengers in 1C and 1D to hear. "She tried to board with a fraudulent ticket. Some college kid in a hoodie, thinking she could scam her way into first class. I caught it immediately, of course." Elena froze. "A fraudulent ticket? For seat 1A? "Yes. Can you believe the nerve?" Beatrice continued, oblivious to the way Elena's face had gone pale. "She caused a massive scene, screaming, refusing to step aside. I had to have Miller arrest her. She's handcuffed out in the terminal right now, waiting for airport police." Beatrice laughed, a harsh sound that grated against the soft jazz playing in the cabin. "She even tried to claim her daddy booked the ticket. The usual sob story. I told her she can sit in a jail cell instead of a lie-flat seat." The cockpit door, which had been slightly ajar, suddenly slid open with a heavy mechanical thud. Beatrice stopped laughing. Captain David Reynolds stepped out. He wasn't wearing his uniform jacket, just his crisp white shirt with the pilot wings pinned above his heart and the 4 black and gold epaulettes on his shoulders. He was a tall man, filling the doorway, and the expression on his face was terrifyingly blank. It was the face of a man who had just heard someone admit to assaulting his child. "Repeat that," David said. His voice was very quiet, but it carried through the first-class cabin like a shockwave. Beatrice blinked, startled by the captain's sudden appearance. She didn't recognize him immediately as Margot's father. She only saw the pilot. She straightened up, assuming he would be on her side. "Oh, Captain Reynolds," Beatrice said, putting on her professional smile. "Just a bit of drama at the gate. Nothing for you to worry about. We had a disruptive passenger trying to sneak into first class with a fake boarding pass. I had security remove her." "A disruptive passenger," David repeated, taking a slow step into the galley. He towered over Beatrice. "Young, black, wearing a Columbia University hoodie." Beatrice's smile faltered slightly, confused by the specific description. "Yes, exactly. You saw her?" And you said she was handcuffed? David asked. The muscles in his jaw were working, a rhythmic clench that Elena recognized as a sign of extreme fury. Yes, she became aggressive when I called her out, Beatrice said, though her confidence was starting to crack under David's intense stare. She refused to leave. Officer Miller has her in custody. We're safe to depart now. David stared at her for 5 long seconds. The silence was suffocating. The passengers in the front rows had stopped drinking their champagne. They were watching, wide-eyed. Beatrice, David said, his voice dropping to a register that sounded like grinding stones. That passenger wasn't a scammer. Excuse me. Beatrice blinked. That ticket wasn't fake, David continued, taking another step forward, forcing Beatrice to step back against the galley storage lockers. I know because I bought it, with my employee privileges, for my daughter. The color drained from Beatrice's face, so instantly it looked like a magic trick. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Your daughter? She whispered, her voice trembling. Margot Reynolds, David said, pronouncing the name with deliberate precision. Seat 1A. The girl you just had handcuffed. The girl you just publicly humiliated and accused of fraud. Beatrice's eyes darted around the cabin, looking for an escape, looking for an excuse. Captain, I didn't know. She didn't look like what? David snapped, his voice finally rising, cracking like a whip. She didn't look like she belonged in my plane? Is that what you're saying? No, the system, I thought. She had a hoodie? Beatrice stammered, hyperventilating. The clipboard clattered to the floor, papers spilling everywhere. David ignored the mess. He turned to Elena. Call the tower. Tell them Flight 882 is holding its position indefinitely. We are not pushing back. Yes, Captain, Elena said immediately, picking up the interphone. Captain, you can't delay the flight, Beatrice squeaked, terror replacing her arrogance. The schedule, the costs. You worried about the cost? David leaned down, his face inches from hers. His eyes were cold blue fire. You just had my 18-year-old daughter arrested because you were too prejudiced to scan a ticket. You have no idea what this is about to cost. He grabbed his uniform jacket from the hook inside the cockpit and shrugged it on. He adjusted his cap, pulling the brim low. Mark, he called back into the cockpit. Sir. The first officer appeared at the door. You have the comms. Keep the APU running. I'm going outside. Captain, where are you going? Beatrice cried out, reaching out as if to stop him, then pulling her hand back as if he were red hot. David stopped at the aircraft door. He looked back at her, and the look of disgust on his face was absolute. I'm going to get my passenger, he said, and you are coming with me. Me? I can't leave the gate. You are coming with me, David commanded, pointing a finger at the jet bridge. And you are going to explain to that police officer and to my daughter exactly why you made the biggest mistake of your career. He turned and marched down the jet bridge, his strides long and furious. Beatrice stood frozen for a moment, shaking, until Elena stepped forward. I suggest you follow him, Beatrice, Elena said, her voice icy, before he calls the CEO directly, although, knowing Captain Reynolds, he probably already has. Beatrice swallowed hard, her legs trembling as she stumbled after the captain, walking toward the terminal where her karma was waiting for her, sitting in plastic handcuffs. Back in the terminal, the atmosphere had shifted from irritation to a kind of morbid curiosity. The boarding process for Flight 8822 had stalled. The first-class line had trickled through, but the economy passengers were still waiting, watching the spectacle unfolding near the window. Margot Reynolds sat on the hard plastic chair, her wrists aching. The handcuffs were tight, standard police issue, designed to restrain full-grown men, not slight 18-year-old girls. She kept her head down, staring at her sneakers, trying to block out the whispers of the people standing nearby. "Must be drugs," a woman in a fur coat whispered loudly to her husband. "They always try to smuggle things in the expensive seats, hides in plain sight." "Shame," the husband muttered. "She looks so young. Probably a mule for some gang." Margot bit her lip so hard she tasted copper. "I'm a pre-law student on the dean's list," she screamed internally. "I volunteer at the legal clinic. I have never even had a parking ticket. But none of that mattered here." In the eyes of the gate agent and the whispers of the crowd, she was already convicted. Officer Miller stood over her, looking bored. He checked his watch, annoyed that the actual airport police patrol unit was taking so long to arrive to transport her for booking. "My hands really hurt," Margot said quietly. "Can you please loosen them? I'm not going to run." Miller rolled his eyes. "If you didn't want the bracelets, you shouldn't have assaulted the staff. Sit tight. The van is 5 minutes out." "I didn't assault anyone," Margot insisted, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. "Please, just look at my phone. It's right there under the chair." "Evidence," Miller grunted. "Don't touch it." Suddenly, the automatic doors from the jet bridge hissed open with a violence that made several people jump. Usually, when a pilot enters the terminal, they walk with a relaxed, rolling gait, perhaps chatting with a flight attendant. But the figure that emerged from the bridge was moving with the focused, terrifying energy of a guided missile. Captain David Reynolds strode into the gate area. His gold wings caught the overhead lights. His cap was pulled low, shading his eyes, but the set of his jaw was visible to everyone. The 4 stripes on his shoulders identified him as the supreme authority of the aircraft sitting outside. Behind him, stumbling in her heels and looking pale as a ghost, trailed Beatrice Halloway. The murmur of the crowd died instantly. It is rare to see a senior captain leave the cockpit minutes before departure. It is even rarer to see one looking like he is ready to tear the building down brick by brick. David scanned the area, his eyes locked onto the scene by the window immediately. The burly security guard, the curious onlookers, and the small, huddled figure in the grey hoodie with her hands cuffed behind her back. David stopped. The air seemed to leave his lungs. Seeing his daughter, his brilliant, kind, soft-spoken Margot, shackled like a criminal in front of strangers, broke his heart, then immediately forged the pieces into a weapon of pure rage. He walked straight toward them. The crowd parted instinctively, like water moving around a shark. Officer Miller looked up, surprised to see the pilot approaching. He straightened his posture, assuming the captain was coming to thank him for removing the threat. "Afternoon, Captain," Miller said, hooking his thumb in his belt. "Sorry about the delay. We've got the situation contained. Just waiting on transport for the suspect." David didn't look at Miller. He looked only at Margot. He dropped to one knee right in front of her, ignoring the gasp from the crowd. The pristine knees of his uniform trousers hit the dirty airport carpet. "Margot," he said softly, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "Baby, are you okay?" Margot looked up, her eyes wide and wet behind her glasses. "Dad, I told them. They wouldn't listen. They broke my phone." "Dad?" Miller repeated the word, his brain stalling. He looked from the girl in the hoodie to the distinguished pilot kneeling before her. The resemblance was suddenly, terrifyingly undeniable. The same eyes, the same shape of the face. David stood up slowly. He turned to face Officer Miller. The transition from tender father to furious commander was instantaneous. "Take them off," David said. His voice was low, devoid of any politeness. "Sir, Miller stammered, stepping back. "She's a suspect. She assaulted an agent. I said, 'Take them off!'" David roared. The sound was so loud, so authoritative, that it echoed off the high ceilings of the terminal. People 3 gates away stopped walking. "That is not a suspect. That is my daughter. And if you do not remove those handcuffs in the next 3 seconds, I will have your badge, your job, and your pension before my wheels leave the tarmac." Miller's hands shook as he reached for his keys. The color had drained from his face. I didn't know, Captain." "Beatrice has said—" "I don't care what Beatrice said," David snarled, stepping closer, forcing Miller to fumble with the lock. "You handcuffed a passenger with a valid first-class ticket without verifying a single thing. You profiled her, and you detained her." The click of the handcuffs unlocking sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Margot pulled her hands free, rubbing her wrists where angry red welts had formed. David immediately pulled her into a hug, shielding her from the staring crowd. He kissed the top of her head, whispering, "I've got you. I'm here." Then, David turned his attention to the woman standing frozen near the podium. Beatrice Halloway was trembling. She had watched the reunion, watched the hoodlum turn into the captain's beloved daughter, and she knew her career was currently dangling by a thread over a fire. David guided Margot to stand next to him. He put his arm around her shoulders, presenting her to the room not as a victim, but as royalty. "Beatrice," David said, his voice carrying clearly to every stunned passenger, "come here." She didn't want to move, but the weight of the captain's command and the hundreds of eyes watching her forced her feet forward. She walked over, clutching her hands together. "Captain Reynolds, surely you understand," she began, her voice high and pitchy. "It was a misunderstanding. She didn't have ID out. She was wearing that hoodie. How was I to know she was your daughter?" David stared at her, incredulous. "That is exactly the problem, Beatrice," David said coldly. "It shouldn't matter whose daughter she is. If she was the daughter of a janitor, she still had a valid ticket. You didn't treat her this way because you thought she was a fraud. You treated her this way because you didn't think she looked like she deserved to be in my plane." He gestured to the crowd, to the wealthy passengers in Zone 1 who were now looking at their feet, ashamed. "You embarrassed her," David said. "You treated her like a criminal in front of all these people. So now, you are going to fix it." The terminal was dead silent. Even the announcement speakers seemed to have paused out of respect for the drama. Beatrice looked around, her face patchy with red blotches of embarrassment. "Fix it. I can apologize. I'm sorry, Miss Reynolds. It was a mistake." "Not good enough," David said. He released Margot and took a step toward the podium. He picked up the microphone for the gate PA system. Beatrice's eyes went wide. "Captain, what are you doing?" David ignored her. He pressed the button. His voice, usually calm and reassuring from the flight deck, boomed through the speakers of the entire gate area, and likely the neighboring ones too. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain David Reynolds speaking. I am the pilot in command of Flight 8882 to London." The crowd listened, captivated. People were holding up phones, recording. "We are currently delayed," David continued, his eyes locked on Beatrice. "The reason for this delay is that a passenger, a young student from Columbia University, was racially profiled, harassed, and falsely arrested by the gate staff at this very podium." A gasp went through the crowd. Beatrice looked like she wanted to faint. She reached out as if to grab the mic, but David simply turned his body, shielding it from her. "This passenger," David went on, his voice hardening, "happens to be my daughter. She holds a valid ticket for seat 1A. But because an agent decided she didn't look the part, She was placed in handcuffs. David paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. He looked at the passengers who had sneered at Margot earlier, the couple in the furs, the businessman. I want to make one thing clear. This aircraft does not move until two things happen. First, my daughter is treated with the respect every human being deserves. And second, the individuals responsible for this abuse of power are removed from my flight operations immediately. He released the button and set the microphone down with a heavy thud. He turned to Beatrice. You are relieved of duty, Agent Holloway. Get your things. You are not working this flight. You are not working any flight that I command. Ever again. You can't do that, Beatrice shrieked, panic finally overriding her shame. I've been here 20 years. You can't just fire me from the gate. I can, David said calmly. And I just did. I am the captain. I have the final authority on who approaches my aircraft, and I am designating you as a security risk to my passengers. A security risk, Beatrice sputtered. You are unstable, aggressive, and prone to irrational judgment, David listed off, ticking them on his fingers. That makes you a risk. Now, leave the terminal before I have Officer Miller arrest you for interfering with a flight crew. Beatrice looked at Officer Miller for support, but Miller, realizing the wind had shifted violently, looked away. You better go, Beatrice, he muttered. The captain has jurisdiction here. Beatrice let out a sob of frustration. She grabbed her bag from behind the podium. As she walked away, the click-clack of her heels was the only sound. Then a slow clapping started. It was the businessman in the grey suit, the one Beatrice had bypassed to yell at Margot earlier. He was clapping. Then the woman in the fur coat joined in. Then the families in economy. Within seconds, the entire gate area was erupting in applause. It wasn't just for the drama. It was for the justice. It was for the satisfying sight of a bully finally hitting a wall they couldn't climb. David didn't acknowledge the applause. He wasn't doing it for them. He turned back to Margot. Come on, he said gently, taking her backpack from the floor. Let's go home. Dad, Margot whispered, wiping her eyes. Everyone is staring. Let them stare, David said, guiding her toward the jet bridge. They're staring at the VIP in seat 1A. As they walked past the scanner, the new gate agent, a younger woman who had been watching from the next counter, terrified, hurried over. Captain, she said nervously, I can scan her ticket manually. David stopped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. He pulled up Margot's reservation. Scan it, he said. I want it on the record that she boarded properly. The young agent scanned the code. The machine let out a cheerful beep. Thank you, Margot said to the young agent, her voice wobbly but polite. They walked down the jet bridge together, the captain and the student. But the karma wasn't finished yet. Beatrice might have left the gate, but David Reynolds had been flying for 30 years. He knew the CEO of the airline on a first-name basis. As they stepped onto the plane, Elena was waiting. She had tears in her eyes. She had heard the announcement over the open door. Margot, Eleanor said, opening her arms. Oh, honey, I am so sorry. Margot stepped into the hug, finally letting go of the tension. Hi, Elena. Your seat is ready, Elena said, pulling back and smoothing Margot's hair. I put the extra duvet on it, and I have a hot chocolate waiting. David nodded to Elena. I need to make a call to headquarters before we push back. Keep the door open for another 5 minutes. Take your time, Captain, Elena said with a fierce smile. We aren't going anywhere without you. David walked Margot to seat 1A, the massive private suite at the very front of the plane. He waited until she was settled, wrapped in a blanket, with her headphones back around her neck. You okay to fly? he asked, crouching beside her one last time. Margot nodded. She looked exhausted, but the fear was gone. Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks, Dad. I love you, kiddo. Love you too. David stood up and walked to the cockpit. He sat in the left seat, put on his headset, and turned to his first officer. Mark looked at him with awe. That was impressive, sir, Mark said. That wasn't impressive, Mark, David said, dialing a number on the sat phone. That was just the warm-up. Now I'm going to make sure she never works in an airport again. He waited for the line to connect. Yes. Get me the Director of Operations. This is Captain Reynolds. I have a code red personnel issue at JFK. Yes, I'll hold. The plane was safe. The daughter was safe. But for Beatrice Halloway, the turbulence was just beginning. As Flight 882 reached cruising altitude over the Atlantic, the cabin lights were dimmed to a soothing twilight blue. In the cockpit, Captain David Reynolds monitored the instruments with his usual stoicism, but his mind was far from the mechanics of flight. Every hour or so, he would ask Elena to check on seat 1A. She's asleep, Captain, Elena reported quietly over the intercom 3 hours in. She ate dinner, the lobster thermidor, and she's been out cold for an hour. She looks peaceful. Good, David exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally loosening. Let her sleep. Don't wake her for breakfast until top of descent. While Margot slept in the luxury of the first-class suite, wrapped in Egyptian cotton and protected by her father's presence, a digital storm was brewing 30,000 feet below. The businessman in the grey suit, Mr. Henderson, a tech CEO travelling to London for a summit, had recorded the entire confrontation at the gate. He hadn't intervened physically, but he had done something arguably more powerful. He had documented the truth. Using the aircraft's high-speed satellite Wi-Fi, Henderson uploaded the video to his social media platform. He titled it simply, "Gate Agent Handcuff Student. Turns out she's the captain's daughter." The algorithm caught fire. By the time Flight 882 was passing over Nova Scotia, the video had 50,000 views. By the time they reached the Irish coast, it had 3 million. The video was damning. It showed Beatrice's sneering face, her refusal to look at the ticket, the rough way Officer Miller manhandled Margot, and the glorious, earth-shattering moment Captain Reynolds emerged from the jet bridge to reclaim his child. Comments flooded in from around the world. The way his voice changed when he said, "Take them off." Chills. I know that gate agent. She was rude to my grandmother last year at JFK. Finally, she gets what she deserves. Imagine being so racist you accidentally arrest the pilot's daughter. Career suicide speedrun. Back in New York, Beatrice Halloway was sitting in the airport break room, trying to write an incident report that painted her as the victim. She was typing furiously, claiming Margot had been belligerent and threatening. She believed that her 20 years of seniority and her union rep could save her. She thought she could spin this. Then her phone started buzzing. Texts from co-workers, links from friends. She clicked one. It was the video. She watched herself on the screen. She watched the way she looked, arrogant, cruel, dismissive. She heard her own voice screeching, "I don't need to check anything to know trash when I see it." Her face went pale. In her memory, she had been authoritative. On video, she looked like a monster. The break room door opened. It was the station manager, a stern man named Mr. Henderson, no relation to the passenger. He held a tablet in his hand. He didn't look happy. "Beatrice," he said, his voice flat. "Stop writing the report." "I'm just documenting the assault," Beatrice stammered, standing up. The captain was completely out of line. "Stop!" The manager cut her off. He turned the tablet around. It was a live news broadcast. The headline read, "Airline under fire. Viral video shows profiling of pilot's daughter. "Corporate just called," the manager said. "They've received 10,000 complaints in the last 2 hours. The hashtag #LawFire Beatrice is trending #1 in the country. But Beatrice slumped back into her chair. "Hand over your badge, Beatrice," the manager said, extending his hand. "You are suspended without pay, pending the investigation. But between you and me, you should probably start looking for a new line of work. Maybe one where you don't interact with human beings." Beatrice stared at the linoleum floor, the silence of the room amplifying the sound of her own heartbeat. The karma wasn't just knocking on her door, it had kicked the door down. Meanwhile, in the sky, Margot Reynolds woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and warm croissants. She stretched, looking out the window at the sunrise over the clouds. She felt safe. She felt worthy. And she had no idea that while she slept, the world had risen up to defend her. The descent into London Heathrow was smooth, the massive Boeing 787 gliding through the thick cloud layer with the grace of a bird returning to its nest. For Captain David Reynolds, this landing felt different. It wasn't just the end of a shift. It was the end of a battle he hadn't known he would be fighting when he woke up that morning. As the wheels kissed the tarmac, a touchdown so gentle it was barely felt in the cabin, David engaged the reverse thrusters and slowed the beast to a taxi speed. He took a deep breath, looking over at Mark, his first officer. They shared a nod. The job was done. The passengers were safe. But there was one last thing to say. David keyed the microphone for the public address system, his voice steady and rich, filling the cabin one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. I want to personally thank you for your patience with our delayed departure in New York. To the passengers in the gate area, who stood up for what was right, who refused to let an injustice pass unnoticed, thank you. You reminded us today that character is defined by what we do when we think no one is watching. Justice is a team sport. Welcome home." A ripple of applause broke out in the cabin, starting in economy and sweeping forward to first class. It was a rare moment of unity in a metal tube usually defined by class dividers. When the seatbelt sign was extinguished and the cabin doors opened, there were no police waiting for Margot this time. Instead, the jet bridge was occupied by a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit. Mr. Sterling, no relation to the banned list, the regional director of the airline's European operations. He held a massive, ostentatious bouquet of white lilies. David emerged from the cockpit, his cap under his arm, looking tired but radiating a quiet, dangerous calm. He walked to seat 1A, where Margot was gathering her backpack. She looked small again, just a student in a hoodie, but her posture had changed. She held her head high. They exited the aircraft together. The regional director stepped forward, a practiced, apologetic smile plastered on his face. "Captain Reynolds." "Miss Reynolds," he began, his voice dripping with corporate conciliation. "On behalf of the entire airline, we are mortified by the events at JFK. The CIO has been briefed personally. We have arranged a private limousine to take you to your hotel, and we hope you will accept these flowers as a token of our sincerest apologies." He thrust the bouquet toward Margot. Margot looked at the flowers, then at the man. She didn't reach for them. The silence stretched for an uncomfortable 10 seconds. "I don't want flowers," Margot said, her voice soft but cutting through the noise of the disembarking passengers. "Flowers die in a week. The humiliation of being handcuffed in front of a crowd lasts a lot longer." The director lowered the bouquet, his smile faltering. "Of course. We understand. We want to make this right." "If you want to make it right," Margot continued, stepping closer to her father, "then make sure that woman never has the power to do that to anyone else." "I don't want an apology," I want change." David placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, a silent anchor of support. "You heard her," David said to the director. "We'll take the car, but keep the flowers. You're going to need them for the PR funeral you're about to host." The proceedings against Beatrice Halloway were not the slap on the wrist she had expected. Back in New York, she sat in a cold, grey human resources office. Her union representative sat beside her, but he wasn't arguing. He was looking at the table, defeated. The evidence was overwhelming. The viral video had clocked 10 million views in 24 hours. But worse than the video were the logs. The investigation triggered by Captain Reynolds revealed a pattern of behavior spanning a decade. Dozens of complaints from minority passengers that Beatrice had dismissed as unruly behavior, which management had previously ignored. "Beatrice Halloway," the HR director read from a prepared statement, not even making eye contact. "Your employment is hereby terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct and violation of the airline's anti-discrimination policy." "Terminated?" Beatrice gasped, clutching her purse. "But my pension? I'm 2 years away from full benefits. You can't take my pension." "Gross misconduct nullifies the severance and pension eligibility clauses of your contract," the director said coldly. "You are leaving with what you came in with, which frankly is nothing." Beatrice was escorted out of the building by security, the very security she used to weaponize against others. She was blacklisted. In the age of the internet, her face was synonymous with prejudice. No airline, hotel, or customer service agency would touch her. 6 months later, a friend from law school sent Margot a photo. It was taken at a discount grocery store in New Jersey. Beatrice was there, wearing a green smock, scanning items at a checkout counter. She looked older, her face etched with bitterness and fatigue. She was scanning a carton of milk for a teenager. The irony was poetic. She had refused to scan a ticket for a girl who belonged in the sky. Now, she was forced to scan groceries for minimum wage on the ground. She had wanted to be the gatekeeper. Now, she was just the help. Margot Reynolds didn't just survive the incident. She used it as fuel. She sued the airline, not for greed, but for principle. The lawsuit was settled out of court for an undisclosed, 7-figure sum to avoid a public trial that would have destroyed the airline's stock price. Margot didn't buy a car or a mansion. She took the money and established the Reynolds Sky Foundation. The foundation had a simple mission: to provide full law school tuition and flight training for minority students who had been told they didn't look the part. 3 years after the incident, Margot graduated at the top of her class at Columbia Law. The ceremony was held on a crisp spring morning. David Reynolds sat in the front row. He wasn't wearing his uniform anymore. He had retired the year prior, hanging up his wings with a perfect safety record, but he wore his best suit. At the graduation dinner that night, in a quiet Italian restaurant overlooking the city, the mood was celebratory but reflective. David poured 2 glasses of vintage champagne. He looked at his daughter, now a lawyer, a philanthropist, and a woman who had turned her worst day into a legacy of hope. He raised his glass, his blue eyes shining with pride. "To Cert 1A," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Margot smiled, the memory of the handcuffs long replaced by the weight of her diploma. She clinked her glass against his. "To the captain," she replied, "and to everyone who helps us fly." The story of the girl in the hoodie and the captain who saved her became a modern legend in the aviation world. It served as a permanent warning to every gate agent and staff member. Treat every passenger with dignity, because you never know when the person you are judging holds the power to ground you forever. And that is the story of how one arrogant gate agent lost everything because she judged a book by its cover. It's a powerful reminder that prejudice isn't just cruel, it's a liability. Beatrice Halloway thought she held all the cards, but she forgot that in the game of life, karma is the dealer, and the house always wins. Margot Reynolds turned her humiliation into a scholarship that will help thousands, proving that true power isn't about keeping people out, it's about lifting people up. I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in that boarding area? Would you have recorded the video, or would you have stepped in to help? Let me know in the comments below with the hashtag #JusticeServed. If you enjoyed this story of dramatic justice and the bond between a father and daughter, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. We post new dramas every week. Thanks for watching, and fly safe.